Today's show is packed with advice from an editor of two different online magazines that writers will appreciate. Whether you're just starting out and want to learn about the industry, or you're ready to submit your work, this episode is chock full of information you'll want to hear. My guest, Ed Ahern, is not only an editor, but also a prolific poet and horror fiction writer. He started his writing journey later in life, but as he tells us, has been writing like hell ever since. Aspiring writer? Stay tuned for an episode filled with honest tips to help you excel in your writing journey. Or perhaps you love poetry and fiction. There's plenty for you as well. Welcome to the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Welcome back to the Brewing Fiction Podcast. I'm Keith, and today I'm honored to welcome Edward Ahern to the show. Ed, great to have you with me.
Thank you. I appreciate being invited and a pleasure to be here.
You and I have been on hold for a while. I think we were introduced way back with Allison McBain, so here we are finally.
Thank you. Yeah, Allison is my guardian angel in more senses than one. So
Is she?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I met her episode 2, and she's introduced me to a number of fantastic editors, writers, poets. She's an amazing writer, but also an amazing person. Over and above everything else that she's doing, her crazy.
Over and above.
Yeah, authors versus AI, which she's well into. Actually, I've got Allison coming back on the show in December, I believe. We're going to check in, see how she's doing. So, yeah, I look forward to that. All right, Ed, we're going to step into Author's Corner, where I give you the mic, let you tell me a little bit about yourself. And from my research, I understand there's lots to tell. So why don't you give the listeners a little bit of a sneak peek of who you are, and then we'll start the interview.
Thank you. As I think it was Mark Twain said, it's mostly not lies. It's very, very short description of I'm pushing 82, so I'm certainly no spring chicken. I was able as I went along to live most of my pipe dreams, and it wasn't intentional, but it's the way it happened. So when I got out of university, I went in the Navy as a diving officer and a bomb disarming officer, and I did that for a few years. And then I was a reporter for the Providence Journal for a year or so. And then I went into intelligence collection. Let's just leave it at that.
Oh, okay.
And spent 4 years in Germany and 3 in Japan, and they finally closed our organization, saying that we were too hot to handle. So,
oh dear.
So I came back, had no job, but did have a wife, 2 kids, and a dog, and got a job as an export sales guy for Abitibi Price, a Canadian company,
Right.
Canadian American company.
Right. Yeah, familiar with.
And I did that for a quarter century. They didn't have the heart to fire me. They retired me at 58. I went to work for that part of the craft organization that does not own the New England Patriots. They do pulp and paper.
Okay.
And I did that for about 5 or 6 years until we finally just sort of dwindled away. But the beauty of that was I got to go to see Patriots games in the executive suite. So
you go.
Oh yeah, with customers, of course, but it was nice. Of course, it was very nice.
Okay.
And then as I was tailing off of the craft organization, I had been starting to write fiction and poetry. It was something I always wanted to do, and I just never, I was always chasing a buck, and I thought if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. So for the better part of the last 15 years, I have just been writing like hell. And I don't count them much anymore, but there's probably 520 or 30 stories and poems published, including some books.
Wow.
And probably 3 or 4 times that with reprints. So
Wow. Quite impressive starting so late. Is it all fiction, or have you written some nonfiction as well?
Almost no nonfiction,
Okay.
Unless you count the poetry as nonfiction.
Yeah.
I've got a novella. I've got a novel coming out November 4th. We'll probably talk about a little later.
Yes. Okay.
Um, and the rest of it is short stories and poems. It's just I enjoy writing. It's immensely satisfying for me. Some of it arguably is not very good. Some of it, I mean, it gets published, so yeah, I have to assume the editors have the same bad taste I do as an editor. So
Right. Yeah. You found the right editors at least.
I guess, yeah.
Wow. Okay. I've been doing a little bit of reading, trolling you a little bit, and I did see that you had an extensive work history in different career paths. I've started writing only in this past 2 years, so I'm a late bloomer as well. And I always wonder if doing it as a hobby is more motivating than, as you said, trying to chase a buck to become rich and famous, which almost never happens.
Good. What do you write?
I am fiction for sure. Horror is my main genre.
Oh,
Yeah. I really love suspense and horror. Just about everything I write is in that genre.
are you a member of the Horror Society?
I am not.
The Horror Writers of America, and I assume they're referring to North America, so
Okay.
it includes everyone.
Yeah.
I'm a member
Are
and have
you?
been for some time, and it's an awfully useful information source, and it's relatively inexpensive. And I would kind of encourage you, aside from pumping up the membership, I would encourage you to join because I think it's a useful resource.
Okay. Yeah. I will definitely look into that. And that's obviously available online.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That's my takeaway for today. Every episode I get a great takeaway, so I've got one early today. We're going to just have a little bit of fun here. I call it Fast 5. Do you like coffee or tea?
Coffee, by all means, and black.
Black. Oh, okay. I haven't graduated to black yet. How about a paperback or an ebook?
If you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said paperback, but I've gotten old and lazy. And I now read more on the Kindle.
Kindle,
So
yeah.
so I'm at least ambivalent and probably leaning toward Kindle.
Okay. I've thrown that one out there a number of times, and I'm a little surprised how many people choose ebook. I listen to audiobooks. I don't read a lot of books physically anymore, but I'm shocked how many people have converted to ebooks. Would you prefer a beach getaway or a mountain retreat?
That's a hard one. We have a couple timeshares that are both on the ocean, so
Oh, okay.
clearly my feet are taking me to the ocean rather than the mountains.
Fair. Okay. Have you ever gone to a retreat of either beach or mountain to write?
I have not.
Okay.
I have thought about it. They have the least popular of the national park retreats is Dry Tortugas because there's nothing there. I mean, literally,
Okay.
there's nothing there.
Right.
There's not even a 7-Eleven, nothing there. And I thought about it, and then one, I didn't want to leave my wife, and two, I thought, no, I'll be chasing sand fleas rather than trying to write. So I
Right.
said, no, I'm not going to do it. So no, short answer is no.
Fair enough. Do you prefer standalone novels or a book series?
um, my most recent novel is a standalone, so I suppose I should say standalone, but I've written a series of longish short stories that I'm going to cobble together into a long novella. So that's arguably each individually already published, but
Right.
so that's arguably a series. So and I appreciate I'm being weasel worded, so you can call me on it anytime.
It's funny. A lot of these people struggle with, and the reason I continue to do it is because we always have a good laugh. A lot of people are both. All right. And number 5, writing in silence, or do you listen to background music?
I've tried both, and I find I do better in silence.
In silence. That is Fast 5. A little bit of fun. You gave me a chuckle. So thank you. Sliding on into our interview, Ed, you're a managing editor at Fairfield Scribes. And then you're also, I believe you mentioned at Bewildering Stories, you're also an editor there. Can you explain what your role is and how much time that takes from your day?
Sure. I have to. Allison propagates a lie every time she publishes Scribes Micro. She does all the heavy lifting, and I am the final arbiter on a lot of, well, really almost all the stories. But She does all the work and all the organizing and all the admin and so forth, and I'm on the masthead as a probably as a be nice to the old guy thing, but uh, and I appreciate it, but I try and be honest about it. I do a fair amount of work on Scribes Micro, but nothing like what Allison does. Bewildering stories, I do a little more. As I mentioned, I have a posse of 5 or 6 readers who, along with me, rate stories. And then if I get split votes from my reviewers, I'm the final reader, and I decide whether I say yes, we're going to publish you, or no, we're not.
Right. Okay.
Basically,
Right.
then Bewildering Stories is fairly collegial, and what we do is we rate the stories and poems that we receive. It's a weekly publication, so there's 4 magazines a month, and we rate the stories and poems. And depending on our ratings, if it's a good rating but not a great rating, they're promoted to the quarterly review. So they're actually published a second time in the quarterly review as we like this a lot.
Okay.
If they're excellent, there's an annual review. And if you
Wow.
make the annual review in Bewildering Stories, you had a pretty good, damn good story.
Okay.
And so Bewildering Stories takes more time than Scribes Micro, far and away. So,
Okay. Gotcha.
but I compartmentalize the time. So Bewildering Stories is kind of my Sunday work, and Scribes Micro I sort of fit in with my morning coffee. So.
Okay. And then you still find time to write your own stuff after reading everybody else's.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's and after all this time, I can still be envious. It's it's like, damn, that's so good.
Is that right? Yeah. Do you get a lot of inspiration, and do you feel that it helps you in your writing by reading so much diverse work?
I do. I think it's. I don't think it's imitative. I hope it's not imitative.
Right. Fair. Yeah.
I think it's more a process of osmosis. There are turns of phrases and plot schemes and things that I think are particularly adroit, and I think, okay, that's great, and I find if there's a plot twist, and I can go outside of reading for this, I can even see it's a plot twist on a TV show, and I think, ooh, that's cool.
Okay.
I may need to steal that at some point, and
Right.
and
Right.
um, but I tell people I have a swamp gas mind, and that's my ideas just kind of come up in these greasy bubbles and pop, and there it is, and I think, okay, and then I pretty it up and give it some structure and rewrite it a couple times, and there it is. And it's funny, pieces that I love sometimes I have a hard time getting published, and stuff that's kind of throwaway
Yeah.
sometimes gets picked up quickly. It's just there's no, and sometimes stuff that I have a tough time um, um, getting published initially will get published in reprint 3 or 4 or 5 times. Sometimes there's no accounting for editorial taste.
I guess, right? And, that's good advice, too. We have listeners who are aspiring writers and aspiring authors. You may think it's your best work ever. You may think it's the worst piece that you've written, but there's an audience out there probably for your work. Would you say?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. All right. So you have a journalism background. Do you think that has helped you at all get into editing and writing as well?
As a reporter and in journalism school, I was focused more on the writing than the editing. I worked late nights and early mornings for a morning edition paper, and I'm so old that I used to compose on a linotype. I'm not even sure you know what that is, but it's it's
I
it's an
don't.
old it's an almost hot metal machine that goes directly to the press room. Almost, it goes to the editors, but
Wow.
and you key, and it's almost, it's you can't really edit it very well. It was a really clunky machine.
Yeah.
So I had to say, if I didn't want the editor calling and accusing me of being illegitimate and other things I can't mention on the podcast, uh, I would self correct myself as I typed, and I think that was extraordinarily useful because I could kind of catch myself on the fly a little bit because I used to cover cops, and I would come from a police station with some copy and a notepad,
Yeah.
and some of it from interviews, some of it from the police blotter, and literally just transcribe that onto a line of type and go. So yeah, it was, and that was useful. And then the editing came a little slower. The editing after I retired, the editing came after the writing, and my initial writing, a lot of it was not good. I was going to use something a little cruder, but it wasn't good. And
Okay.
as I read back over it now, I can see where it wasn't, and I've done enough of it now that I may still not be good, but at least I'm better.
Okay. You're advancing the right way at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Would you say using that tool with your writing, do you think there's a little bit of resemblance in what modern writers can use, like word processors? Do you think that is a good tool for writing? Do you use something like in Microsoft Word when you're writing that corrects as you go, or do you just edit it yourself
No,
after?
no, no. I Microsoft Word, God bless them, picks up some of my more egregious mistakes.
Right.
I do not, and I don't have anything violently against AI, but I have yet to use it. I kind of feel like it's a cheat,
Right.
and I know a lot of the places I submit to will not accept an AI generated piece,
For sure. Yeah.
poem or story. So
Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to taint the well water, So I've thus far avoided AI, and it hasn't. I don't think it's particularly hurt me. Even in writing the novel, I think I was able to probably took me a little longer, but I was a little happier with the result, I think.
Okay, good. I think a lot of people, have the ad. You can get any add-on you want for your word processor.
It's okay for it to correct spelling or point out syntactical errors because I tend to write fairly quickly, and
Right.
I know what I thought I wrote, and sometimes it's not what I actually wrote.
Right. Fair.
My mind gets ahead of my fingers sometimes. So
Yes.
so
Yep.
no, it's quite useful. I have absolutely nothing against Microsoft Word telling me what a dumbhead I am. So
Okay. Okay. Just not generative, right? You just want to stay away from the
yep,
generative
yep.
AI. Okay. No, that's fair. Okay. So, as editor, how do you decide which stories and poems, which work to publish for your magazines?
Okay, we don't have neither magazine has is thematic in the sense that we don't have a monthly theme or a weekly theme or anything like that,
Okay.
or seasonal themes. We have none. So the pieces are based on their merits, and occasionally we'll load seasonal poetry into the right season. But
Okay.
that's about as close as we ever come to being specific about it. So we judge on the merits, and as is true, I think in any creative pursuit, there's always disagreements, which is why I'm the umpire in both cases. Um,
Right.
because I've been around long enough that if it doesn't pass the sniff test, then I usually veto it. Or if I think it's a great concept, what we do, um, and I'm gonna blow our horn a little bit for bewildering stories.
Okay.
We encourage new writers, and one of the things that Bewildering Stories does that almost no other magazine does, if we think the story is going in the right direction but it's not there, or it's too sloppy, or it went off track somewhere, we'll explain that. We'll send the reviewers comments to the writer saying that we like some things about it but not all, and if he's willing to rewrite it, we, which is to say me, will reconsider it.
Okay.
And more often than not, for Bewildering, not so much for Micro, but for Bewildering, if they do a decent job rewriting it, we accept it.
Okay.
And so it's an awfully powerful learning tool for a new writer. And it's one that I don't think enough new writers take advantage of. Because if the story is total crap, we're just going to tell you gently no and ask you to go away.
Sure.
Um,
Fair. Yeah.
If the story is not very good, but we think you show some promise, we'll ask you to submit something else.
Okay.
If we think the story has promise and we like it, kind of, sorta, we'll ask you for the rewrite.
Wow.
And
Okay.
if we just gush and ooh about it, we'll send you this flowery note that says we loved it and we're going to publish it.
Okay. Good to know. That's one of the reasons I started the podcast, was to find those little treasure troves where, as a new writer myself, when you Google things, there's just too much. You don't know where to start. You don't know, is it legitimate? So to hear about bewildering specifically is very interesting for me as a new writer, and I'm sure to others who are listening as well. So thanks for sharing that. Can you explain the process from submission to when it finally gets rejected or accepted?
Okay, it is in principle the same for both magazines.
Okay.
The story is received. It's more or less date stamped. It's sent to a couple of review in the micro case, sometimes more than two review readers, but it's certainly at least two.
Okay.
In Bewildering's case, it's always two review readers. They provide feedback back to the editors. In the case of micro, if there are two positive reviews received, then it's generally speaking a shoe-in to be published. I say generally because there are occasions where I probably shouldn't tell you this, but maybe I will anyway. Sometimes we get in the micros case, we get more good stuff than we can actually publish. We have a finite space limit for the magazine. So,
Of course.
and in that case, I'm asked as the final arbiter to say no to what are perfectly good pieces. And now, for those not familiar with Scribes Micro, it's 100 words, give or take 10 words. And that's true of the poetry as well. There's just, except we now have a separate poetry editor. I'm more the fiction side now.
Okay.
Um, in the case of Bewildering Stories, again, it comes in, it's date stamped. The story is sent to one of, at this point, three coordinating editors. I'm one of them. And then I assign it to readers. The readers get back to me. If their reviews are favorable but wishy-washy, I'll probably read it myself.
Okay.
If their reviews are glowing, I'm not going to bother to read it because I trust the review readers, and so if they both love it, that's good enough for me, and so I'll recommend that we publish it.
Okay.
Again, if the reviews are mixed, I'll read it myself. More often than not, I'll decline it. If both reviews say that it needs rewriting, then I'll read it myself to see if I can add anything to suggestions about the rewriting process.
Gotcha.
And then get back to the author saying, we like some stuff we didn't like so much. Here's the
Okay.
stuff we didn't like so much. Can you do anything with it? So the overall process for both magazines is the same. It's some of the specifics are a little different.
No, that's fair. It sounds like you guys give a lot more, more generous feedback to help the writer, either improve the piece or learn from it at least. Whereas other publications sometimes don't even get back to writers, from what I
Yeah, well,
understand. So,
it's a mixed blessing because about once a month I get a shittygram from a writer who got two negative reviews.
okay, yeah,
And remember that I send the reviews back to them.
right,
I clean them up a little bit. I tell my readers I want them to be bluntly honest, and I don't send that exactly back to the writer.
fair,
I make it a little more
easy to
amiable than,
swallow. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
a little more constructive in the criticism, should we say?
Gotcha. Okay,
Um, but yeah, and once a month I'll get a shittygram back from a writer who is convinced that story is terrific, and we missed the point, and we have no concept of great literature,
oh dear.
and we probably beat our mothers. Uh, so
But you still stand by doing that, even if you do
oh,
get that.
absolutely, and of
Wow.
course it goes. We occasionally get those. Allison fields most of those. for Scribes Micro.
Okay.
I feel the ones for in my part of Bewildering Stories. I feel them. So
Okay. What advice would you give a new writer looking to get published in your magazine specifically, but even if you want to broaden it to just generally?
Scribes Micro has very specific word limits for poetry and
Right.
fiction and nonfiction for that matter. Um, and that's 100 words, give or take 10 words.
Right.
So if you're not accustomed to writing very short, or if you don't want to write very short, that's not the publication for you. So you can kind of draw a pencil line through it and move on to something else.
Fair.
Bewildering is also one of relatively few publications that will accept long pieces and serialize them over, because we're a weekly, we can get away with doing that. So we will
Okay.
serialize it over, we'll serialize whole novels,
Wow.
but we'll certainly serialize a story that's 10 or 15,000 words as well.
Okay.
So if you have
Okay.
a longer piece that you think is good, longer pieces are a harder sell. They got to be better than shorter pieces. But if you have a long piece you really like, by all means, send it to us. We'd be
Okay.
happy to look at it.
Okay. What are some common mistakes that new writers often make in submission?
You got to follow the guidelines. And in the case of an anthology or a magazine that has a specific theme, don't bother to submit something that just sort of kind of a little bit touches on that theme. It won't be
Right.
accepted. I can almost guarantee you it won't be accepted.
Okay.
If it fits closely with the theme, and they really love the idea of the story, they may accept something where the writing is maybe not quite so good, but the concept is super. And I'll give you a case in point that just happened. I just finished a 2,000 worder. I won't bore you with the plot line, but I submitted it still smoking in the computer.
Okay.
I sent it because it was so close to the theme they wanted. I sent it to an anthology called Exquisite Death. It's a horror story,
Okay.
and they accepted it within 2 days.
Oh, wow.
And I realized I had it workshopped in a writers group I'm in, and they made some serious suggestions for improvements, which I did. But as I was rewriting the story, I received the acceptance from Excruciating Death. So I
For
sent
the
the
original.
revision
Yeah.
for the original that with all the warts and wrinkles and parts and everything else that was in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I sent the revision back and I said, look, here's the revision. You accepted the original. If you prefer the original, I'll shelve the revision. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Um, and they came back and said, no, we'll take the revision. So I went out to the group and I said, well, you're in luck. I'm not going to fire you
Right.
because they like the revision.
Yeah. Well, congrats on that. In your opinion, what are some of the red flags that might lead to a submission being rejected outright? So let's, beside the guidelines, if everything looks to be to spec, is there something that will? And I guess you kind of have to speak for your readers a little bit here now, right? But to be rejected outright.
Yeah, it's and I'm going to have to go outside my current editorial duties to speak to. A lot of magazines have a socio-political ethic that may or may not be stated in their guidelines, but is implicit in what they accept and what they don't like. So if you write a story that is unduly misogynistic or is in whatever way politically incorrect or
Yeah.
is even if it's a good story, even if that wasn't your intent and you're making your villain is a shitheel of whatever persuasion offends the editors,
Right.
they're quite possibly going to reject that story because it doesn't fit the worldview that they're trying to present to their readers. And they have, I don't agree with it, but I kind of understand it. They have niche readers, niche customers, niche people who read them faithfully. And
Fair.
the niche
Yeah.
readers are of like persuasion. and they're not going to want to read something that violates their worldview.
Fair.
And
Okay.
sometimes that's easy to spot, sometimes not so much. Sometimes, so if you get it doesn't happen to me all that often, but every once in a rare while, I'll get a sort of a snarky reply, and I know, oh, I've offended someone's taste. Not maybe the
Okay.
quality of the story, but I've offended their taste. So
Hmm. Okay. That must be a learned knowledge as well. For you to be able to pick up on that, that must be a learned skill that you've developed over your writing
sure,
career. Yeah.
sure. Oh yeah.
Okay.
The other thing that getting published is a numbers game, and you can refine your search, and you can and two things I would encourage. If somebody accepts your story, they like your writing, you
Okay.
can submit to them again when it's permissible to do so. You can submit to you already know they like you,
Fair. Okay.
so you can submit again. Submissions is a numbers game,
Yes.
and I learned this early on too. That one, don't take submissions personally. It's just no, just move on.
Yeah.
It's like the cop says, nothing to see here, move along.
Right.
Uh, and so unless I'm submitting to some place where I know they're probably going to accept any doggerel I send them,
Right.
um, uh, I will get probably 4 or 5 rejections for every acceptance.
Right.
Some
Yeah.
of that is I didn't target my market properly. Some of that is I didn't edit the story as well as maybe I could have. Some of that is maybe the story still blows. Some of it I may have to rewrite it. It's
Mm-hmm. Sure.
and the beauty of if I get 6 or 7 or 8 rejections without any indication of we liked it, but if they say we liked it but it doesn't fit the theme, that's great. That's almost like an acceptance. That
Right.
tells you that you should submit there again. If they
Okay.
just send you the terse boilerplate letter, thank you but no thank you, they didn't like it. So either said them something completely different, or maybe look somewhere else.
Just move on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have like a form letter where you will send those writers just to when you have no desire to accept anything further? Do you have just a thanks but no thanks form letter that you use, or is it a little more personal every time you reject?
It's one of those. It depends.
Okay.
More often than not, it's a form letter,
Yeah.
and it's actually faster because I write short anyway, so it's actually faster for me to type the form letter than it is to pull it, to go to another file and pull it in and copy it and all that other nonsense.
Fair enough.
So
Yeah.
so so it's 2 or 3 sentences, very very short, to the point,
Yeah.
basically saying thank you but no thank you. If I say submit something else, that's a good
That's a good. Right.
that's a good thing. So
Okay.
so you should do so.
Good. Great advice. Can you share a moment when a submission surprised you, perhaps even moved you? A piece that really.
Writers don't always write evenly, and so a writer that and I guess I'm thinking more of poetry now than I am fiction, but a writer who is kind of an okay journeyman poet,
Yeah.
nothing stellar, but yeah, covers the point well, and doesn't butcher the syntax too badly, and sticks to a theme pretty much. And then every once in a while, they'll send a poem that just blows you away. Just is so almost uncharacteristic of the writer. And I think it's because maybe poetry is shorter, and because maybe the creative urge is stronger when you do it. It's fresher maybe.
Yeah.
Um, I find that's more common in poetry than fiction for sure.
Yeah.
And it's and so, then but then the next poem that the person sends, they're back to that journeyman level.
Okay.
So it's the tip of the iceberg, kind of.
Right.
The
Right. Yeah.
iceberg still floats. They're probably still going to publish it, but
Yeah.
that one piece is it just shining in the sun.
Gotcha. How would a new writer build a strong portfolio? I want to develop my skills. I want to hone my craft, but like, is there such a thing as a writer's portfolio that a writer should work on?
There's If you picture, and I'm sorry I don't have a video, but I'm holding my index fingers and my thumbs together in the shape of a triangle.
Okay.
Okay, picture it as a pyramid, and the really, really good stuff is really hard to get accepted, to write A and to get accepted B, so that the acceptance rates at the top of that pyramid are probably less than 1%
Right.
and significantly less than 1%. The acceptance rates at the bottom of the pyramid, which is to say, fledgling magazines that are just starting, magazines that have a very high acceptance rate because they're relatively indiscriminate. I'll give you a specific case in point. There for horror stories, because I know you write horror stories.
Yeah.
There is a magazine called Siren's Call. I don't know if you've encountered it,
Have not.
and I think they're actually open for submissions right now.
Okay.
And
Good
they
to know.
accept, they publish really large anthologies, and they accept probably 60 or 70% of the stuff that's sent to them.
Wow.
And there is a search engine that I use faithfully called Duotrope. That's Duotrope, Duotrope.
Okay.
Costs $50 a year. Well worth it, because one of the many things Duotrope does is that they show you the acceptance rate for the various magazines and anthologies.
Okay.
So that if I wanted to submit to the New Yorker, and the New Yorker is like 0.0002 of a percent of acceptances, and it takes them a year and a half to send something to you.
Right. Right.
Whereas Siren's Call will probably get back to you in less than a month, and the odds are better than average that they'll if it's horror oriented, the odds are pretty good that they'll accept it.
Okay.
And having in the case of building a portfolio, it's useful to have acceptances. And so I would say set your sights as a new writer. By all means, you can simultaneously submit pretty much all you like. So submit once or twice to the impossible dream category, and
Just in case.
maybe a week or two later submit to these guys at the bottom that are much more likely to accept the story,
Yeah.
and are also probably more receptive to beginning writers.
Great advice.
They're not so fixated on the writer already having a rep.
Right. A couple of acceptances will go a long way in motivating you to continue. Whereas
Sure.
if the first 10 replies are all thank you, but no thank you, oh boy, it's going to be hard to do that 11th one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. So that's the editor side of Ed. How about we talk a little bit about your writing side? So you mentioned at the start that you have well over 500 pieces published. I read that you try to publish a couple of stories and a couple of poems a month. Is that kind of a goal or not any longer?
I write probably 3, maybe 4 poems a month. I'll write 2, sometimes maybe 3 short stories, which would be 1,000 to 2,000 or 3,000 words a month.
Okay.
I'll try and publish all of them. Eventually, I will either revise them or decide they're dead. And I have a fair number of dead pieces
Okay.
that just was a bad idea, badly written, and it's better off dead.
Okay.
So I just it's a little blank. I keep typed sheets with the title and the publication, and so and if there's a blank next to the name after a year or so, it's dead.
Okay.
And I just write it. I just handwrite in dead, so I don't bother to look at it anymore.
Fair. Do you keep all that digitally, or do you physically print it all and keep it in a folder?
It's actually, I probably should keep it digitally, but I keep it on paper and pen.
Nice.
Um, just because I'm kind of a Neanderthal. It's just easier for me to do
No.
it that way,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's easier for me. It's faster for me to look at the printed sheets and see if a poem has been published yet and if it fits the theme or not. Than it is for me to scroll through the electronic files.
Sure.
Just easier.
half dozen submissions a month, or do you sometimes do a lot more of older stuff with a resubmission? Like, how many times do you submit, or do you submit one story to 20 publications? Like, explain how you do it as a writer.
Okay, I'll submit, and I'm extreme. I don't encourage this as a general practice for new writers, but
Okay. Okay.
this is just what little Eddie does. Um, I'll submit 20 to 30 times a month. That will be multiple submissions of a story or a poem. I'll usually submit a story because most places accept simultaneous submissions. So I'll
Right.
submit it 2 or 3 times and 2 or 3 times. And my initial submissions, I'm shooting high, may as well.
Sure.
But I also submit, when I'm shooting high, I submit to people that have a fast feedback rate, a
Gotcha.
feedback rate that's measured in days or weeks. And again, Duotrope will tell me that.
Okay.
So when I look at Duotrope and I try and decide where I'm going to send it, I'll pick a place that's going to be difficult, but I'll pick a place that's going to be quick.
Quick. Yeah. Then you
And
know.
if I get 3 no's from those difficult and quick places, then maybe I'll lower my sights a notch or two to good places that will accept 5 or 10% of their submissions.
Okay.
And if that doesn't work, and as I think I mentioned earlier, if at a certain point I'll realize that maybe it's not very good yet, and I'll try and rewrite it.
Right.
The
Okay.
other thing I do with submissions is, and a poem that I'll probably read later, a short poem. You don't only get published once. Many anthologies and magazines that are thematic will accept reprints. They won't pay particularly, but they'll accept reprints.
Right.
And so my record for a reprint on a story, I believe, is 11 times, and
Wow.
on a poem is 9 times.
Okay.
The poem I'll read later has been published 7 times.
Okay.
And so and my theory is that I'm getting myself out there. If more people read my stuff, that can't be a bad thing. And I'm not deceiving anyone. Everybody knows it's a reprint. But it fits that theme well enough that they'll take a reprint as opposed maybe to a virgin story or poem
Yeah.
that's maybe not as good. So,
Okay. Good to know. Is poetry your first love?
oh no, I knew I was going to be a genre writer in fiction, and so that's what I wrote. I've got 35, 40 literary stories that have been published, and 1 or 2 of them have won awards. So that's nice. But
Right. Right.
far and away, there's more fantasy and horror and fairy tales. I write fairy tales sometimes too. So,
Do you? Okay.
and then as I started getting, I was kind of getting developed as a writer and as an editor. And of course, as an editor, I was reading poetry, and some of it was really bad. And we were actually going to publish it. And I thought, really? I can write crap that bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can be that bad a poet. And so I started writing poetry, and it started getting published, and I got better at it. So I'm now a member of 4 poetry groups, one of which I co-chair, one of which I lead, and so I write a lot of the poetry that I write on a monthly basis. I read at those poetry groups for the feedback. It's essentially a critique group.
Yeah.
Although I'm sometimes impatient, and sometimes if I'll read something that's actually already been published. So,
Oh, okay.
but don't do what I do. Do what I say.
Well, as I said at the start, I just like to get a takeaway. So we'll take some of your advice, and others will just chuckle and move on.
There you go.
Yeah. Do you highly recommend writing groups and poetry groups? Then you're part of a
Absolutely,
number. Yeah. Hey.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
I'm Scribes Micro is an offshoot of a critique group called the Fairfield Scribes, which has been in existence for about 10 or 11 years now.
Okay.
I've been a member for 8 or 9 of those years. We kind of pride ourselves on being thorough and on being constructively critical. We don't waste a lot of times saying nicely things, but we
Right.
also don't take the knives out. We don't. We're gentle with our criticism, but we're firm about it. So if there's
Okay.
something, and the better the writer, the harsher the criticism, because the better writer can take it.
Right.
So if we get in scribes, if we have a relatively new writer, we kind of back off a little bit, and we're a little gentler than we would be. I'm regularly abused, and as I should be,
Yeah.
because I abuse the more seasoned writers in the group as well, and so
Fair.
it's
Okay.
in a good way, in a constructive way.
Okay.
So if there's something we don't like about a story, or something that doesn't work, or a disconnect or something, we'll call it. We'll pull the covers. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and that makes the story better, or the poem, is in the case of a critique group for
Sure.
poetry.
Yeah. Yeah. So Fairfield Scribes, how exactly does that writing group work? Is it an online conglomerate of people chatting, or is it more just a submission? Like you'll submit to somebody who will read and give criticism. How does it all work?
Okay, we originally pre-COVID, it was in person,
Oh, wow.
and
Okay.
the meetings used to go from sort of 8 o'clock and go through several pizzas until sometimes past midnight. And then with COVID, we went online,
Yeah.
and we became a lot more regimented. So now we start at 8:15, 8:30, and we're generally done by 10. But that's because we've kind of set time limits on the critiques and on the length of story that can be provided for critiquing. We rotate the people who submit; they're all members of the Fairfield Scribes. We're
Okay.
fairly picky about who we admit.
So you have
Um,
to. So you kind of have to apply to be part of the group.
you apply to be part of the group. There's a vetting
Okay.
process. We will
Yeah.
read a piece of your work, and we give you a questionnaire that has a couple of trick questions,
Okay.
which I won't specify.
Of course. Yeah.
But which are designed to kind of weed out the bombastic people. We need people who are clever enough to spot the errors in their own work more often than not, and also are able to provide comments on other people's work. You have to be able to be a pretty much okay writer, and a pretty much an okay critiquer. And so, and we have a pretty good group. I think we always have had. Occasionally, we get a couple duds that survive the filtration process, but they generally find that they're not happy with the group, and they ditch us rather than the other way around.
Right.
There's only, I think, in 10 or 11 years, there were only 2 people that come to mind that were actually drummed out of the core, both for very good reasons.
Okay.
Um, I won't tell you why.
No, that's okay.
But for good reasons.
Yeah, fair. So definitely look into writing groups to help as well. Okay. Well, would you mind reading that poem you alluded to?
Sure.
I'd love to hear it.
If I can, let me pimp the novel for 30 seconds or so.
Oh, please, by all means.
It's called The Will o' the Wisp. It's available for pre-order on Amazon and Kindle. It'll be available paperback and Kindle for purchase on November 4th.
November
It's
4th.
it's a it's a thriller spy novel with sophisticated characters, all of whom are relatively bent. There are no pure heroes in it, but there's no pure villains either. So I think it's a pretty good novel. It's gotten good reviews so far. I deliberately priced the Kindle version down to about $6, so that
Okay.
to encourage people to buy it. I think it's a pretty good read, and it's, as Graham Greene used to say, it's an entertainment. It's not meant to be literary fiction, so don't. But it also is not overly gory, and it's not lewd and licentious either. It's not at all pornographic. So the what sex is in there is muted and discreet, should we say?
Okay.
So
All right.
it's a PG-13 verging into R novel. So
Okay.
now the poem
Yeah.
It's an oldie of mine, and it's an old favorite of mine. That's why I picked it. It's also topical for October. It's a Halloween poem.
Great.
It's been published, I think I mentioned 7 times,
7 times, yeah.
can't be too awful. It's called The Stormwalker.
All right.
There is what was a man who walks October storms in darkness. On sleepless nights I see him striding, all wrapped up in sheets of lightning, or flushed with the sodden rain of fall. The gentle nights are spent without him, who rouses for the howl of wind that consummates his passage. I think to join him in his trek, but fear that he will tell me of why he travels in this violence, or worse, for whom he seeks.
So how early in your writing career did you write that one?
That was one of those top of the iceberg poems.
Indeed.
That was one that struck the right chord fairly early on. So
Okay. Good for you.
I think it's on page 2 of my list of poems.
There you go. I definitely cannot write poetry. I'm too literal, I think. I have a hard time grasping what is being said and what is being written. So hats off to those who can do it, because goodness, it's hard enough to write long fiction, let alone really, tell a story in 8 lines, 9 lines, 10 lines. Crazy. Good for you.
On the other hand, I don't encourage it as a career. There's a quote there's a quote by Robert Frost that says, "There's no money in poetry, but on the other hand, there's no poetry in money."
Yeah, there you go. Love it. Love it.
I'm going to pitch somebody else here because she's a wonderful person and she's a gifted writer, and she's God's gift to other writers. It's a woman named Gabby, Gabi Coatsworth, Coatsworth.
I spoke with Gabby 3 or 4 episodes ago, as a matter of fact.
Did you? Okay.
I did.
Wonderful
So
person.
she is wonderful indeed. Yeah.
She has 2. One is you can read. I think it's live now, but it might also be online. You can read for 5 minutes if you wish. And the other is a session that she has specifically for writers and writers' problems and questions about publishing and questions about plotting and questions about getting an agent. I used to go fairly religiously. I don't as much as I should probably.
Okay.
But it's online. It costs nothing. If you put in Gabby Coatsworth, I'm sure, aside from all the stuff she's written, I'm sure that those 2 meetings will come up.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate you taking the time. It was an honor to meet with you, chat with you, and I'm looking forward to taking some of the advice that you give. And I know you say maybe do as you say, not as you do, but you have some insights that I'm sure a new writer can put in his toolkit to take along, and I hope to do that myself. So thank you for sharing that, and again, appreciate meeting you and appreciate your time, Ed. Thanks.
No, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Join me next week when I welcome E.S. Oliver to the show. She's the author of the dark urban fantasy thriller novel, Waters of Erd, Chooser of the Slain. She will also discuss the 2 adult dark fiction novels she's currently working on. Emery exudes positive energy that shines through in our chat. Tune in next week to hear how her love and passion for life have led her on a journey of helping readers deal with personal trauma through writing genre-bending books she's coined Theratainment. That's next time on the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone. Cheers.